Thought Bubble Audio.
Look, up in the sky.
You will never find the more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
Welcome to Beer with Geeks with Tim and Frank.
Who are you?
I'm Batman.
I am Iron Man.
Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Hi, Christopher. I'm Nero.
My name is Inigo Montoya.
You're a wizard, Harry.
A couple of guys with a couple of beers and a whole lot of pop culture nostalgia.
Make it so, number one.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
Named the dog Indiana.
Life finds a way.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Now sit back and crack open a cold one, because it's time for Beer with Geeks.
It comes in paints.
Shaken, not stirred.
Great Scott!
I was way off. I knew it started with an S, though.
Hi, and welcome to Beer with Geeks, where two geeks geek out with beer. I'm Tim, and with me, as always, is my man who is in a midlife crisis. It's Frank. How are you today?
Oh,
The worst crisis of all.
a little early. I didn't think I was there yet. Okay. Oh God, that's got me. Now I'm spiraling. You kicked it off. You manifested it just by.
Just by saying midlife crisis.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, cool.
Do you think you'd actually have a midlife crisis when you get there?
I kind of don't think I will.
No, I've been looking forward to being middle-aged for a long time, and so like the idea that like, oh no, my youth, like whenever I'm having the time of my life.
Yeah,
time
no.
I'm having, so like, what am I looking back on? The
I
time
don't see it.
play sports, like okay, like yeah.
I don't see it as getting old. I see it as aging into my personality.
Yes, I said that to somebody the other day. I said like I would rather is that they asked if I had like always been like an old man, like spoke like an old man, and I said, oh yeah, absolutely. But I said I'd rather grow into my age than leave it behind.
Ooh, that is so wise.
Thank you.
That is so wise. Yeah.
But Frank, we have more to do than to sit around listening to me quote myself. So let's get down to business. Thank you. I've been waiting to quote Benjamin Franklin my entire life. And
Yes.
finally arrived. Yeah, I did it, everybody. I can go
Actually, you quoted John Adams yelling at Benjamin Franklin.
That's true. But that was a new one. That's true. Good point.
Excuse me as I put on my cardigan to just prove that I'm
your
an old
blood
man.
flow isn't the same because you're old. Is
That's
that
right.
The point? Is
Yes.
that the point of
Let's
this?
make the most of this beautiful day.
Did you have a favorite sweater when you watched Mr. Rogers? Did you have a favorite sweater? Mine was the green one.
Oh, interesting. I always picture him in the red one.
See, there you go.
Yeah.
I think most people do. If you look at the Mr. Rogers kind of stuff that exists out there, whether it's the movies, documentaries, the books, whatever, he's usually in the red. Red is
Yeah.
the one. But the green was my favorite.
Red like Fred.
Nice. I like that.
Mm.
Well, let's rank like Frank, if you will.
Ah, well,
no, but first before we do that, tell me what you're drinking.
we have a little tradition to upkeep first. Yes. I am enjoying a Jack's Abbey Boston Celtics Banner City Light Lager.
Ooh,
as we
nice.
Yeah, it's a nice refreshing last gasp of summer that was still in my fridge. So we are due to get rid of the summer stuff because it is time for the stouts and the porters and the all the other lovely darker. Go ahead.
Well, you're like, Frank, it's not summer. What do you do with drinking stouts and porters? Get away from the summer.
Give me that.
Yeah. Very good.
Lap it up, fuzzball.
I'm happy for you. All the same, I'm drinking another Cisco brewery Whale's Tail.
Pale ale.
Wait, it's a whale of a tail.
It's a whale's tail pale ale, and it's so much fun to say, as I am so fond of saying. Yeah. So what are we ranking today?
Frank, I asked you right before we started this episode how you felt about crises, and not midlife crises, but specifically DC Comics crisis events.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to talk about like which one is the best one, and that criteria is so nebulous and vague because you could talk about your favorite, which I would say before we even talk about them is either Identity Crisis or Infinite Crisis.
Yes.
Because that's when we were starting to read comics, really. So we have an affinity for that era where we were like reading every tie-in. And,
yes. Way too many.
Right. I was just saying to somebody that I said, I Absolute Power to me was like, it was fine, but I didn't read any of the tie-ins, so I only got like a third of the story.
Sure.
So like, of course, it was just okay. I wasn't reading the rest of it.
You didn't experience the whole thing.
No, I didn't.
Right.
It was not absolute power. It was like power to 2.
Wow.
Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Power of 1. Issues 1
The
through
power
4.
of many. Sorry.
The power of many. Oh man, I want to miss them. But anyway, so I want to talk about the Crisis books and like what makes a good one, because we went through an era where we just like there were a lot of crises happening all together, and we got kind of burned out on the crisis, and so it went away for a while, and that's when Frank stopped reading books. But that's
coincidentally, yes.
You're like, oh, yeah, Crisis is a good time to go out. But anyway, so here are the crises as follows. Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is the first one. 0 Hour, A Crisis in Time, the long forgotten crisis, I think. It's its 30-year anniversary this year, I think. So it's making a bit of a comeback. I have
so
the
now
plot
a 30 hour.
30 hour. Yes, exactly. Ooh, extra time.
Or is it 0 Dark 30?
It is not.
Huh.
0 Hour is about like the timeline crunching, and like because there is no multiverse, right, at this point,
right?
So it's just the singular timeline. So the like extra characters that come into play are the characters that exist in the past and the present. And there's this thing with Hal Jordan as Parallax, and he's trying to recreate Infinite Earths, but so on and so forth. Won't spoil. Don't know too well. So anyway, there's that one. Then there's Identity Crisis. There's Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, and then Dark Crisis, which is the latest one that came out last year, I think.
Yeah.
So
I think it was 2 years. Not to correct the person who actually is reading comics, but I think it was 2 years ago.
Time is nebulous and wibbly wobbly, Frank. I'm not really sure when things happen anymore. So you could have said it happened 3 years ago, and I went, yeah, that sounds about right. Your favorite's Identity Crisis or Infinite Crisis?
I think. Okay, so here's the thing. I would say Identity Crisis, but Identity Crisis almost doesn't count as a crisis.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
I think I think it's more of a crisis in name,
right?
But,
because Identity Crisis is a term,
right?
Like midlife crisis,
right? But given that it is sort of separate, it's not out of continuity for the time, but it is sort of a separate, standalone series that Brad Meltzer did. It kind of feels like it's its own thing, and that they almost used Crisis as a pun, as a reference, but not. So I almost don't consider it a regular crisis, but certainly it's my favorite of the books we've talked about. It's my favorite one.
I think it exists in a weird way in the same place that 0 Hour does. In that it's like the real event is 0 Hour, a crisis in time, and it's just using crisis to get to wrap it in. But if you just call it 0 Hour, it doesn't really matter. Identity Crisis to me, I think it's probably my favorite because it's contained. There are parts of it that certainly haven't aged very well.
Yes.
It's like ultimate, like Woman in the Refrigerator.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. And so that like is kind of in poor taste, not intentionally poor taste,
right.
but aged all the same.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a really engaging mystery. and like fits really nicely into that. Like the best stories are the humanist stories about superheroes, and there's like so very little punching and explosions and beams in the sky and whatever. It's like a weirdly refreshing, horrifying story. In its own way, it's quite adult for superhero comics.
Yes,
for like mainstream modern superhero comics.
It's a mystery. It's kind of a psychological thriller.
For sure.
And it's a really good character piece. Like the characters, even the lesser known characters that you're not super familiar with, you get to learn who that character is pretty quickly, and like they feel distinctive. There's a something that people say often is that a lot of times poorly written DC comics, you could put any of the words into any character's mouth and it would fit. Like they're just all so interchangeable. But this is one book that I think you absolutely could never say that about, because all of the characters do feel very well defined and very themselves. Like Batman is Batman, the Flash is the Flash, the Green Lantern is Green Lantern. Like they're just very much themselves. They're kind of the quintessential versions of themselves in a lot of ways. So it's one of my favorite. It's almost like that's one thing I could point to and be like, any one of these Justice League characters, if you want to like know who this character is or what their characteristics are, look at how Brad Meltzer wrote them, and that's pretty much what I think the archetype of them is.
Yep, I 100% agree with that. But it's not a crisis.
It's not really a crisis. It's not really a crisis. I feel like we have to like.
So how would you define a crisis? Because this is unquantifiable. It's the equivalent of like someone being like, "You got a 86 on this." Why?
No,
it feels like one. It feels like an 86. Like quality grading.
Just vibes. No, it's more than vibes though. For crisis, I think a crisis. Okay, it has to have that in the title, yes, but it has to be a crossover event. Usually, I think they're usually maxi series of like 12-ish issues, typically.
Yep, the first one was, so that's a good way to establish. I don't think Infinite Crisis was 12. I'm pretty sure it was 6.
I don't know if it was, and I don't know if Final Crisis was 12 either.
I don't think so. I have both omnibuses over there. I will do a horrible thing and leave the camera to go get them to find out, because I'm not going to use my one lookup for this.
Sure.
Text here.
I have the Infinite Crisis omnibus that I believe you gifted me.
I can't hear you.
I'm talking for the audience.
Bye.
So I have the Infinite Crisis omnibus that I believe was a gift from Tim. This is a real chunk, but he's about to come over with his, so we'll see how much bigger his is. But this is what I've got.
Hey, I got that one.
Yeah, I was just telling the folks at home that this is. I'm pretty sure you got me this. The Infinite Crisis omnibus.
I think I did. Actually.
I think you did. Yeah.
Look at you. Yeah. Have you read it? Because I haven't read mine.
I have actually.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, when I got it, when you got it for me, I was inspired to read it.
Good for you. I'm glad that worked out for you.
Yeah.
Of course, there's no index. That's really what I wanted, but that's really that's not what's going to happen here.
Right. And do they not do that? I guess they don't split up where one issue. Oh, no, they do.
No, they don't. But
no, they do actually.
They do.
They do.
Finale part 7. Okay, see, there you go.
7.
Part 7.
So maybe it was a 6-part, and then they did an epilogue. Because 7 is
normally, 6 is the modern standard.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was not consistent, because they sometimes would put multiple arcs in one volume.
I guess
as a graphic novel. So, but now pretty much every story is 6 issues.
Yeah. It's trade paperback size.
Trade paperback style. Which is a pro and a con.
Because exactly.
Stories do not need 6 issues, and yet here they are.
Right.
But either way, It's almost like the modern television. Like, well, sorry, you have to tell us in 13 episodes,
Right.
or
Right.
22 or whatever. It's not like, well, can we do it in 6? No, 13. Like,
I do appreciate that there are more and more series that are doing like 8 or 10. There's something that's,
it's good and bad because
yeah,
like for the industry, it's terrible. Like,
yes,
the consistency of work and how much people are getting paid for the amount of work that they're doing. Like, because you still have to like give the highest quality, but for a shorter amount of time, and the turnaround is so much faster and whatever. So it's actually horrible.
yeah,
for
for writers in particular, right? Because like once,
especially for writers,
Yeah.
But for me, it's great. But I do
yes,
feel for the people that are working in
for
those
sure.
conditions, because they're basically getting paid for double and triple the work, but they're not getting paid for double and triple the work, I should say.
Yeah, that's right. I think it is better for the viewer, like, because it's I think you get better stories this way. Like the 22 thing was tradition for so many years, was the standard thing for so many years, but it does lead to, we got to stretch this out. And even my favorite shows have suffer from that, where it's like a season has so much filler in it because they needed to get to 22 and the story maybe only was 10 or 15, but like got to fill, you got to stretch it out. So there is something to be said for it only being as many episodes as it needs to be, but it does really disadvantage the creators, which cannot be overlooked.
No, it cannot.
So we both agree that Identity Crisis is a favorite of ours, but we also agree that it's not really a true crisis. So when we look at, like, do you want to jump through these like chronologically?
Yeah, let's do that. This is the Final Crisis omnibus, but like Final Crisis, even the omnibus is almost incomprehensibly difficult to find the answer to. So,
yeah,
more on that later. Crisis on Infinite Earths came out in the 80s, 1985. If my
That's
memory
right.
serves me correctly,
Yes.
It was the consolidation of multiple lines and timelines within Earths within superhero comics to kind of firm up continuity, because nobody cared about continuity when superheroes started coming out. But after almost 40 years of people reading them, it was like, yeah, well, we actually do care.
Almost 50.
Almost 50, right?
In fact, I think that might have been DC Comics' 50th anniversary year.
Okay, Superman was 38, so DC started 3 years before.
Yeah, like I think National Publications or whatever predecessor that became DC,
right?
I think started in 35.
Gotcha. Okay, well, there you go. And people didn't care about the continuity back then, but in the 80s, they really started. It was like a more of an established thing. Core audiences, like, it was now generational and reading backwards. So it was a big event to just firm up the timeline and start fresh and move forward. In some ways, it kind of reads like that now. Like you know what the intention is. I don't find it the easiest thing to get through. I think it's more important as a story for what it did for the industry than as an entertaining read today.
I agree today. Yes.
I'm not sure if that was a hot take or not.
No, I agree with that. The historical impact is huge in terms of how it shaped DC Universe continuity for about 40 years since. And what a big moment it was at the time for readers. But yeah, I agree. It doesn't read like a modern comic. It definitely shows its age. And I felt this way when I first read it 20 years ago, whatever it was. But yeah, it's significant for its historical impact. I feel like as we go through this, each of them have a different thing that they're the most significant for. Like Identity Crisis, I think it's my favorite. So I'll just call it that. Crisis on Infinite Earths, I think, is the most historically significant. As we get into, do you have more to say about that one, or do you want to get into
The only thing with
Infinite
I think
Crisis?
that the Anti-Monitor is like he's like the ultimate MacGuffin villain. Like he's like his machinations and plans, and so anytime that he shows up again, it never feels as threatening as that first story because that's what he was created to do. It's very similar to Doomsday.
I was just going to say this. Yes.
Like Doomsday never feels as threatening as that first appearance, right?
And just like Doomsday, I kind of feel like it might be better off if they didn't dust him off every so often and bring him out into public. Like I kind of feel like he did what he was supposed to do. But I can see why somebody wants to play in the sandbox with that character.
I do think that the first time Anti-Monitor was dusted off was for Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern. He was a member of the Sinestro Corps. Was the Sinestro Corps War? Do you remember that? Like it was like that where all of a sudden you see like who's a member of the Corps. It's like Superboy Prime and Anti-Monitor, and you're like, what? Yeah,
Black
that was
Lantern
crazy.
Anti-Monitor was scary. That was creepy.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. I forgot about that.
First he was Sinestro Corps, and then Blackest Night.
I forgot about that. So like he has his moments, but I think as a whole that the event itself is better as a historical read than an entertaining read these days.
Agreed. Yeah. It is significant for the death of the Flash, death of Supergirl. Like those things are big moments in the continuity and for fans. So yeah,
I think visually there might be more like because like the Flash disappears in a crisis. Like if you're a fan, you kind of know that, but that doesn't mean you have to have read the book. You just kind of
that's right.
Are attached or like the famous cover of Superman holding Supergirl.
Yes.
Like and like I remember watching Supergirl when Tyler Hoechlin was first on there and he like held Supergirl like that and they're like, oh, they did the thing and they like made a poster of it.
Yeah.
And they like did all of that.
And they did Crisis on Infinite Earths eventually.
They did a good one.
I still stand by it. I still stand by it. People still have their different feelings about it, but
for the constraints and the time and the budget and like it's good.
If you know, you know. Yeah.
Hi, and welcome to Supergirl TV Talk.
Good old days. But yeah, that one, that's how I feel about Infinite Earths. Let's talk about Infinite Crisis.
Infinite Crisis was a book that came out in the 2005, 2006.
Yes.
Somewhere in there. And it was basically the reintroduction of the multiverse. Is the opposite of Crisis on Infinite Earths, was the reintroduction of the multiverse, 52 Earths, into the DC canon.
Yeah.
And it's great.
It's great.
Like, it's great. I think what it does, again, it like Infinite Crisis, it's designed to fix things that have gone wrong in DC publishing for a while, which I actually think is an weirdly important part of a good crisis, where like it's not just a big event. It's also there to like do some house cleaning.
Yep, I agree.
House cleaning was storytelling, but also like the darkness of characters. That was actually what had happened. Like the 80s and 90s, like really drove home the I don't know, fatalism of superheroes in a lot of way. And so like there's a scene early in Infinite Crisis where Batman tells Superman that the last time he inspired anybody was when he died.
Yeah.
It's just a really mean thing to say.
Yeah.
And it was all about like kind of putting the joy back in superheroism and I think I really appreciate it from that angle. And I do think Invasion of the Omax is like a really like the scale is so much larger and more threatening than so many other world ending scenarios.
It's this big, sprawling, epic, like it really feels large scale. It feels cinematic to me. I remember feeling that way reading it. Like it felt so big and so significant. Yeah, and it does. You're right. That's a very important component of a crisis is that it has to fix continuity. Like it has its in-universe reasons and it has its out-of-universe reasons for existing, right? I think the way they reintroduced the multiverse to be like the multiverse still exists and no one knew it is really cool. The way that like the Golden Age Superman and Lois and Alexander Luthor were like in that pocket universe or whatever this whole time is a really, really interesting thing as well. Stuff that I really dig. I really like, there is one of the tie-ins tie-in series to Infinite Crisis, which I know I have here, is available in a trade paperback called Superman Infinite Crisis. And it is one of my Dark Horse favorites. I almost called it a Black Sheep favorite, which is funny. One of
I mean, I thought Dark Horse is its own comic. Yes,
that's true.
Yeah. The Black Sheep might have been, in a weird way, less confusing.
Yeah. But yeah, it is a favorite of mine because it shows it's a zoom in on the Golden Age Superman and Lois and them saying farewell to one another and to the universe, and it sort of hones in on those characters, three of them. I believe it's a prequel to the rest of the events of Infinite Crisis. So anyway, that's a really, really good one, and I really dig it. I think that Infinite Crisis is significant as like being a modern reshuffle. A modern reshuffling of the DC universe. I think you could argue, and correct me if I'm wrong, that like a lot of present day continuity still stems out of the events of Infinite Crisis, even post Flashpoint, post Rebirth, but I don't know about since Dark Crisis.
It's a good question. I mean, they're in this space now where like anything that they remember has happened and anything they don't remember hasn't happened. That's kind of like this weird nebulous space.
See, and that's just carte blanche to like reintroduce whatever you want whenever you want,
basically. But in some ways, it is like a cleaner. It is a cleaner way than like, I'm sorry, your favorite stories don't exist anymore.
Yeah,
that's kind of hard. But at the same time, as a fresh reader, you're like, hey, I don't have to know anything. This is great. So,
which is why they do it, right? Like part of why. That and the conflicting continuity stuff that they need to.
Because Flashpoint like could have been a crisis from that angle where it was like corrected things and led into the New 52, which was a reestablishment, but it's not a crisis, so we're not talking about it,
right?
But I don't know if I have much else to say about Infinite Crisis. I think you covered all of it. It does suffer from unwieldiness in that like there's a lot of external things at play. If you just were like, I'll pick it up, I'll see what it's about. Good lord, like trying to help you like follow everybody's relationship and what they're about and what they're doing. It'd be kind of be like watching the MCU and starting with Endgame. And you're like, doesn't matter if you know who everybody is. Good luck. Yeah,
it is. And there were a lot of tie-in series for that one. I remember because I tried to read. I was still a fresh-faced young comic reader, and I was like, I'm going to try and read all of them. I'm gonna know everything that's going on in this story everywhere, and it's so much. The OMAC project, Battle for Bloodhaven, Rand Thanagar War, like all these different stories that all spun out of it. Some, the Superman one I just mentioned. So many. Some are prequels, some are happening during, some spin out of it afterward. But yeah, it's just so much.
Speaking of so much, let's talk about Final Crisis.
Okay.
Final Crisis, one of Grant Morrison's opuses. I got a friend that swears up and down that this is the best Crisis. And he makes a compelling argument, and I'm going to give it in a terrible paraphrase.
Okay, sure.
In that The cover is coming off here, so I'm going to do it with making noise in the microphone,
Sure.
like the podcaster does. Darkseid is the DC's ultimate villain.
Yes.
He is evil incarnate, the devil, like whatever you want to call him. He's actually technically not the devil. That's a different character in DC, but he is beyond that. He is like a constant in the universe as evil. This is what evil is and looks like. And therefore, when he actually like puts his plan into play and wins and succeeds, that's the ultimate crisis.
Yes.
Like you can't act that's the final crisis. Like you actually can't go beyond that, because everything that is the opposite of goodness in the DC universe, every superhero, every good decision, every life saved, it finds its antithetical equivalent in Darkseid, and therefore like also in the anti-life equation that he like finally lets loose, finds and lets loose on the DC universe. And they do lose hardcore. Like it's not even like we're fighting to save the day, maybe we'll win or lose. They just flat out lose.
It's not that thing of like they're losing for issues 1 through 11 and then in issue 12 they come from behind. It's like, I mean, they called it the whole time. They were anytime that anyone asked like, so what is it about? I remember Dan Didio's thing being, well, it's the day that evil won.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. That was all they would really say.
Yep.
Was like, it's the day that evil won. That's really all that's all that can be said about it. And it's true. It lived up to the promise. I got to give them that.
Right. And so like whereas most superhero stories are about evil trying to win and losing, the anti flip of that is good trying to win and losing. Right. And so like thematically and as metaphor and everything, it's like the strongest entry into the Crisis lineup. And so like on like a broader, more epic operatic scale, it's the best.
Mm-hmm.
It's also flat out bonkers and hard to follow. And like there was really inconsistencies in storytelling and tie-ins and where everything fit together in its publishing schema. And so from there, it's not as, from that angle, it's not as good. But if you sit down and actually read it in its like entirety, the way that it was kind of really intended, I guess, without delays and artist shifts and like all this different stuff,
that's right,
then it might actually be the best one. But you have to be on board for just really weird ideas, because Grant Morrison.
Yes, it is very heady, conceptual, metatextual. It really is. It's the most challenging read.
Requires 3D glasses at one point.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. I'm torn between this one and Infinite Crisis for what I think is the best art.
I really like J.G. Jones a lot, but Phil Jimenez is like consistently incredible, and J.G. Jones didn't do all the art.
Didn't finish the series,
book. Carlos Pacheco was the one that finished it out. And so I'm actually going to give it to Infinite Crisis just for the consistency.
That is where I'm leaning. But I think, consistency, yes. I think it's just, that's more, I guess it is more reminiscent of the comic book art that I remember so well, like, because again, that was as you said, like that was like sort of our, not our peak, but like, like the sort of,
it was base camp,
base camp.
Ways. Yeah.
For us. So like that is like when I think of comic book art, it's that style. So I think Final Crisis, I have found it very hard to go back and reread even in one sitting. Just hard to follow.
I think readability is a factor here. Like it has to be.
I agree. I think that's part of why I think it was critically acclaimed, but I don't know if audiences liked it as much.
I don't think so. I don't remember. I think people were turned off by a lot of the bigger ideas, like the Song of the Universe and the this thing in that, and I just don't like. I think people will take it to a point, but they can't follow. Many readers won't follow you the whole way. Either that it's a little too odd or obscure or metatextual or symbolic, and they kind of lack the literative or substantive language to think about it and talk about it. And so I just don't know if mainstream media is kind of the way to, or mainstream comics is kind of the way to talk about those things.
Yeah.
But I do think that it does have arguably some of the finer, better points of any crisis. So like Batman picking up a gun and using a gun for one of the only times in an entire career to wipe out evil, not kill, but it's like a very distinctive thing. He's not even killing him, but he's like doing a thing to like reverse anti-life. But I think like the gun is evil that took his parents, the action is evil that took his parents, and so he's again inverting that whole idea of anti to do the opposite of what is expected, the juxtaposition of the original idea, to then like use it for good instead of what it was for evil for him. That kind of stuff like is an elevation of the material that I don't think you get in Infinite Crisis or Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is really just more popcorn fun. But it's not designed as like really strong character moments. That sense. They're more generically strong character moments. So it's tough. I guess it depends on really what you think makes a story good, like what makes it the best version of itself.
Yeah.
But and then there's Dark Crisis, which I want to wrap up here. Running over time. It was fine. It was mediocre. Truthfully, the art was great. The whole concept is the Great Darkness like has taken over, but it has like taken over basically all the big, like the largest bads that you could come across, Darkseid, Anti-Monitor, things like that, and it just and it uses Deathstroke as kind of its avatar in some way, but the Justice League is disbanded and missing. So what's left are B tier heroes or at least A and B tier instead of the S tier heroes of the original, like the League, the quintessential League. And so it's great for giving characters like Nightwing and John Kent, Superboy, and even the Titans in general, like the ability to handle a crisis on their own, as opposed to being like the support team. Like you guys do the cleanup, or you guys do, this side mission that isn't a tie-in of a tie-in, but instead they're like, Nightwing is the leader, calls the shots, does all the things, and it elevates some of these characters to S tiers, and that has actually stayed in the through the continuity. So even though the Justice League is back and like comes back or whatever, but it at a point in absolute power, Nightwing is in charge of everybody, and Batman, Superman, and whatever are like, you got it, let's do it, your plan, let's go. Nobody questions it. Everyone like respects what has come from that event. And so like, even though the event doesn't measure up, I don't think, to Infinite Crisis or Final Crisis or even Identity Crisis as like a non-ish crisis or 0 Hour or whatever, it does have some of the strongest follow through for some important character elevation. Like, you're no longer a kid, you're just as important. You line up as a leader as any of the big three, and I appreciate that from the event, even if itself was fine.
That's really cool. I really like that.
I think it's almost worth reading just for that, just so you can see those kind of moments.
I really like that in particular. I mean, I feel like if any character could climb the ladder and be at that level, like where you get that kind of respect from Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman and so on, I feel like it is Nightwing.
Grayson, it's Nightwing.
Because
I mean, he's been doing it just as long as the rest of them.
Exactly.
He's just younger than them because he started as a kid. But then they kind of make that point, like he has just as much like superheroing experience as anybody. It's just that the experience doesn't extend itself into these like crisis events and leadership positions. So like, here's the guy in the leadership position doing finally,
It's really cool.
All good. So moral of the story, I think we could probably still say that Infinite Crisis is still the best Crisis out of like general, like what it does historically for comics or in publishing, but also in storytelling and readability. But I do think that Final Crisis deserves another look if you're like in it, if you've got a Criterion Collection brain.
Ah, there you go. Yeah.
If you like put that brain on, you just know that they're going to be in a red room talking for a while. You're just going to have to roll with it. Like nothing's going to happen. It's just going to be a lot of images of vases, and you're just going to have to put the pieces together yourself. Like that's what's happening here.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Stanley Kubrick of crisis events. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. So, but anyway, Frank, it was a pleasure to talk to you as always. Where can people find us?
You can find us on YouTube now, which is fun. You can please like and subscribe, and tell us down below in the comments what do you think is the greatest DC Crisis. Want to hear from you. You could also send that over to us at beerwithgeeks@gmail.com if you want to email us. You can find the show and its archives at beerwithgeeks.com. Anywhere podcasts are found, you can rate and review and follow and subscribe. You can support us at patreon.com/thoughtbubbleaudio if you want to help us pay for all the costs and the time that we put into the show. And you can check out Save Me, the Smallville Anthology at smallvilleanthology.com. If you like Smallville, I am finishing up my Smallville documentary podcast told in the words of the people who were there when they made it.
And it's wonderful. Truly.
Thank you.
It makes me want to go back and watch all 500 and whatever episodes of that show. Yeah.
217, I think.
Okay, that's I was gonna go back and start again because I did about a halfway through the show watch.
You and Palmer, right?
In the middle of season. Oh yeah, but by myself. I think I started somewhere in quarantine. I think, and I ended somewhere in season 5, and around Christmas. And I really want to go back, but I'm also watching all of Star Trek, and that is still taking time.
Sure.
Plus like spending time with my family and going to work and stuff. There's no time to just reminisce, Frank.
I hear you.
Podcast, and that's the good stuff.
Thank you.
So, Frank, always a pleasure. Until next time.
Cheers.